Ethan never believed in family legends. After the death of his grandfather Walter, he inherited the old family house at the far edge of town, a place everyone avoided after dark. People said Walter had spent the last years of his life obsessed with recording strange things. Time, voices, shadows moving where no one stood. Ethan dismissed it all as superstition. But on the night he entered the house for the first time alone, the storm outside felt wrong, like the rain itself was trying to keep him out. The front door opened with a groan, and inside, the air smelled rotten, heavy with dust and damp wood. His flashlight moved across the walls and stopped on something strange. Dozens of clocks, hanging everywhere, all frozen at exactly 3:17 a.m., as if time itself had died in that room. Every clock was silent, yet Ethan could hear something else, faint and mechanical, coming from above him. A clicking sound, a soft whirring, like an old machine waking up in the dark. He looked toward the attic and saw the door standing open. His lawyer had told him it was locked when he left that morning. Ethan stood there staring, feeling the strange weight of being watched from somewhere above. The house unnaturally still except for that sound pulling him upward like a whisper from the dark. Heart pounding, Ethan climbed the narrow attic stairs, each wooden step groaning under his weight like a warning. At the top, the beam of his flashlight revealed something impossible. Hundreds of VHS tapes stacked from floor to ceiling, carefully organized by date in his grandfather's handwriting. Decades of recordings. 1978, 1981, 1986. Years and years of forgotten footage. Ethan moved closer, brushing dust away, confused by what he was seeing, until one tape near the center stopped him cold. It had his name written on it. Ethan, July 12, 1996. His birthday, his exact birth date. Ethan's stomach tightened as he checked the recording stamp burned into the tape casing. 1971. 25 years before he existed. His grandfather had recorded something about him before he was born. Beneath the label, written in shaky black ink, were 5 words that made his blood turn cold. He finally comes back. Ethan stared at it, unable to breathe, trying to understand what it meant, when suddenly the attic door behind him slammed shut, so hard the walls shook. The flashlight flickered. Then, in the darkness behind the stacks of tapes, Ethan heard it, slow breathing, heavy, human, or something pretending to be. Ethan froze in the darkness, gripping the flashlight so tightly his knuckles turned white. The breathing behind the stacks of tapes stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only silence so deep it felt alive. For several seconds he stood there, unable to move, staring into the blackness where the sound had come from. Then the flashlight steadied, and there was nothing there. Just dust, wooden beams, and endless rows of tapes. His mind searched for reason. Maybe an animal. Maybe the old house settling. But none of that explained the tape in his hand. His own name, his birth date, recorded 25 years before he existed. Against every instinct telling him to leave, Ethan carried the tape downstairs into the living room. In the corner, beneath a sheet of dust-covered furniture, he found an old VHS player and television, almost as if someone had left them waiting for him. The power in the house still worked. Barely. The screen buzzed with static as he pushed the tape inside. For a moment, nothing happened. Just white noise and flickering lines crawling across the screen. Then the image appeared. Black and white. Dated October 14, 1971. The camera showed the attic exactly as it looked now. Same walls, same beams, same stacks of tapes. The camera moved slowly, as if someone was holding it and breathing heavily behind it. Ethan leaned closer, his heart pounding, trying to understand what he was seeing. Then the camera stopped, pointing toward the attic window, and standing there was a child. The child looked no older than 8. Thin, pale, motionless, his face hidden in shadow. Ethan felt his body go cold as the figure slowly lifted its head toward the camera. It was him. Not similar. Not close. It was Ethan's face, his eyes, his exact features as a child. Ethan stumbled backward, hitting the table, unable to breathe as the tape continued playing. The boy on screen stared directly into the camera and smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a child. It looked wrong, too wide, too knowing. Then the image shook violently, and Ethan heard his grandfather's voice from behind the camera, whispering in terror, "No, you're not supposed to be here yet." The child tilted his head and spoke, his voice low and impossible. "I remember this place." Then the tape cut to static. Ethan sat frozen, staring at the television, his mind breaking under the impossible truth. Before he could process what he had seen, something changed in the room. One of the clocks on the wall began ticking, then another, then all of them at once, slowly, loudly, and every single clock began moving backward. The sound of the clocks moving backward filled the room like a heartbeat, each tick sharper than the last, echoing through the walls as if the house itself had started breathing. Ethan stared at them in disbelief, watching the hands spin in reverse, dragging time backwards second by second. His chest tightened. The tape was impossible enough, but seeing himself as a child in footage from 1971 shattered every logical thought in his mind. He grabbed the VHS cassette again, turning it over in his hands, hoping for some clue, some explanation. That was when he noticed something he hadn't seen before. Scratched into the plastic on the side of the tape were words so faint they were almost invisible. "Play the next one." Ethan looked back toward the attic stairs. The darkness at the top felt heavier now, almost waiting. Every instinct told him to leave the house, burn the tape, forget everything. But curiosity is stronger than fear when fear makes no sense. He climbed back into the attic, his flashlight shaking, and searched through the tapes until he found another with his name. This one was labeled, Ethan, age 12. Ethan's throat tightened. He hadn't even reached 12 in 1971, because he hadn't even been born. Yet here it was, waiting decades before his existence. The attic felt colder now, unnaturally cold, and as he turned to leave, he noticed something carved into the wooden wall behind the tapes. Hundreds of marks, tallies, as if someone had been counting days, or years. Back downstairs, Ethan inserted the second tape into the player, his hands trembling so badly he nearly dropped it. The screen flickered alive again, and this time the footage showed a bedroom he recognized instantly. His childhood bedroom, the one from the house his parents had lived in when he was growing up. Every detail was perfect. The wallpaper, the bed, the broken lamp in the corner. But the date in the corner of the screen read 1974. Ethan watched in horror as the camera moved toward the bed, where a boy around 12 years old sat facing the wall. Ethan knew that posture, knew that body, himself again. Slowly, the boy turned toward the camera, his face pale and emotionless. Then he spoke directly into it. "If you're watching this, it means he found you too." Ethan's blood ran cold. Before he could react, the boy looked past the camera, at something behind it, and his face changed into terror. The tape glitched violently. Through the static, Ethan heard his grandfather screaming and something else. A deep voice whispering, "Bring him back to 317. The screen went black. And at that exact moment, from upstairs in the attic, Ethan heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, walking across the floorboards. But he was alone in the house. The footsteps above him stopped. Ethan sat frozen in the living room, staring at the dead television screen while the house sank into silence again. The ticking clocks now completely still. For a moment he thought about running, leaving the house, driving until sunrise, pretending none of this had happened. But the tapes had shown things no one should have known. His childhood bedroom, his face, his voice, decades before his birth. That wasn't a prank. Couldn't be. Grabbing the flashlight, Ethan forced himself toward the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last as he climbed back to the attic. The cold grew sharper the closer he got, like winter trapped behind the door. At the top, the attic looked unchanged. Rows of tapes, dust floating in the beam of light, silence pressing in from every corner. But then he saw it. At the far end of the room, behind the shelves, a section of the wall was open. A small hidden room. Ethan was certain it hadn't been there before. The opening was narrow, black, and deep, like something had peeled the house open from the inside. Above it, carved into the wood in Walter's handwriting, were the words, Do not enter before 3:17. Ethan felt sick reading it. That number again. The same time on the clocks. The same whisper from the tape. The same frozen moment hanging over this house like a curse. Then his flashlight hit the floor inside the hidden room, and he saw more tapes. Hundreds more. All labeled with years far into the future. Ethan stepped inside the hidden room, the floor colder than ice beneath his shoes. The walls were covered with photographs, pinned in chaotic layers, stretching from floor to ceiling. At first they looked random, streets, houses, empty rooms, but then Ethan realized every photo had one thing in common. He was in them, in the background, standing far away, watching. In one photo he looked older, in another younger. In one, he looked exactly as he did now, standing outside this very house. Ethan's stomach twisted. These weren't family photos. They were surveillance. Years of them. Decades. Impossible decades. At the center of the room sat an old journal. Walter's journal. Ethan opened it with shaking hands and found page after page filled with the same sentence repeated over and over. He keeps returning. Then, on the final page, Walter had written one message. The boy in the tapes is not your past. It's your future. Ethan stared at the words, unable to understand. Future? How could that be possible? Before he could think, a loud click came from behind him. The attic door locked by itself. And from somewhere inside the walls, a child's voice whispered softly, "You're getting closer." Ethan stood in the hidden room, staring at the journal in his hands, while the child's whisper faded back into the walls. The attic door was locked. He tried it twice, hard enough to rattle the frame, but it wouldn't move. Panic crawled into his chest, but he forced himself to focus on Walter's journal. If his grandfather had known this was coming, then the answers had to be here. Ethan flipped backward through the pages and found dated entries, each one stranger than the last. Walter wrote about seeing Ethan for the first time in 1968, standing at the end of the hallway soaking wet, staring at him in silence. Ethan hadn't even been born for nearly 30 years. Another entry described Walter waking at exactly 3:17 a.m. to find muddy footprints leading into the attic, though no doors or windows had been opened. Then came sketches, rough drawings of the boy from the tapes, Ethan at different ages, always with the same hollow expression. Walter wrote that the boy never aged normally, sometimes younger, sometimes older, as if time moved differently around him. One line was underlined so hard it tore the paper. He does not move through time. Time moves around him. Ethan's head pounded trying to understand. Was Walter insane? Or had he been documenting something impossible? Then Ethan found a folded note hidden between the pages, addressed directly to him in Walter's handwriting. If you found the tapes, it means the cycle has started again. Do not trust the boy. He is trying to come home. Ethan unfolded the rest of the letter, his hands shaking so badly the paper almost slipped. Walter wrote that it had begun with the first tape, then the sightings, then the dreams. Every generation in the family had seen the boy, always Ethan, always appearing before he was born. Walter believed the boy wasn't a ghost or a memory. He was something trapped in time, trying to force his way back into reality. The journal described a place beneath the house, a sealed room Walter called the chamber, where it all started. Walter had found it beneath the basement floorboards, hidden long before the house was built. According to him, something lived there, something connected to the tapes, feeding on moments, recording lives before they happened. Ethan stopped reading when he reached Walter's final warning. At 3:17, the chamber opens. If he reaches it, the loop begins again. Ethan checked his phone for the time. 3:09 a.m. 8 minutes. His breath caught. That meant whatever was happening tonight had happened before. Many times. Maybe endlessly. Then from the television downstairs came the sound of static turning on by itself. And through it, clear as day, Ethan heard his own voice whisper, "Come downstairs. I need to show you what happened to us." Ethan ran down from the attic, Walter's journal clutched tightly against his chest, the static from the television growing louder with every step. The living room was empty, but the TV screen glowed white with flickering noise, casting pale light across the walls where the clocks had started ticking again. still moving backward. Then the static cleared for a second, and Ethan saw himself on the screen. Not the child from before. Not a recording from decades ago. This Ethan looked older, exhausted, blood on his shirt, standing in the basement of the house. He looked directly into the camera and spoke in a broken voice. "If you're seeing this, you're almost out of time. Don't let him open the chamber." Ethan stepped closer, horrified. The older version of himself looked terrified, like he had survived something unspeakable. Behind him in the footage was a metal door built into stone, covered in strange symbols scratched deep into its surface. Ethan recognized it immediately, not because he had seen it before, but because he had dreamed about it since childhood. Cold room underground. A metal door, whispering from behind it. The tape glitched, and the older Ethan screamed into the camera. "He wears your face because he needs your life." Then the screen went black. Ethan stood frozen, trying to breathe, when something heavy slammed beneath the floorboards. From the basement, 3 hard bangs, like something trapped below was knocking to be let out. The sound came again. Bang, bang, bang. Ethan turned toward the basement door at the end of the hallway, a door he hadn't even noticed when he first entered the house. It was old, reinforced with iron locks and chains, but the wood around it looked swollen and cracked, as if something beneath had been pushing against it for years. Walter's journal had mentioned the chamber, the place where it all began. Ethan checked the time again. 3:14 a.m. 3 minutes left. He knew he should leave, call someone, burn the house down if he had to, but every answer pointed below. Taking the flashlight and the journal, Ethan pulled the chains loose one by one, each metal link crashing to the floor like a warning bell. The final lock fell away, and the basement door slowly opened by itself with a long, scraping groan. A blast of freezing air rushed out, carrying the smell of wet earth and something rotten beneath it. The stairs disappeared into darkness, and from below, Ethan heard it clearly now. A child humming softly, the same voice from the tapes, but mixed with it was another sound. His own voice, crying, whispering for help. Ethan stepped onto the first stair, and above him every clock in the house stopped at once. 3:17 a.m. The moment every clock stopped at 3:17 a.m., the house went silent. So silent Ethan could hear his own pulse hammering in his ears. He stood at the top of the basement stairs, staring into the dark below while cold air rose around him like breath from an open grave. The child's humming continued, slow and calm, almost comforting in the worst possible way. And beneath it, his own voice, weak, broken, whispering his name like a plea for help. Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight and stepped down. Each wooden stair groaned under him, and the deeper he went, the older the house felt, as if he were descending into something built long before the walls above existed. The basement walls changed from wood to stone, damp and black with age, covered in strange scratch marks that looked too deliberate to be random. Symbols, circles, lines crossing through each other like broken clocks. Walter's journal had called this place the chamber, but it felt less like a room and more like a wound hidden beneath the house. At the bottom of the stairs, Ethan found a long hallway carved into earth and stone, impossible beneath a normal basement. Along the walls were hundreds of hanging photographs, each one showing Ethan at different points in his life. Birthdays, school, childhood, moments no stranger should have captured. At the very end of the tunnel stood the metal door from the tape, waiting, half open, and from the darkness inside it, something whispered, "You came back." Ethan pushed the metal door open, the rusted hinges screaming into the silence, and stepped into the chamber. The room was circular, carved from black stone, its walls lined with shelves of old tapes, thousands of them, stretching higher than the flashlight could reach. In the center stood a chair facing an old film camera, its reel spinning by itself even though no film was loaded. Ethan's breath caught when he saw the floor beneath the chair. It was covered in names, carved into the stone over decades, maybe centuries. Family names. His family. Walter's name was there. His father's. His mother's. And finally his, freshly carved as if done recently. Ethan backed away in horror, But then the flashlight landed on the far side of the chamber. Someone was sitting there in the dark. A child. Thin. Motionless. Ethan stepped closer and felt his stomach drop. It was the same boy from the tapes. Same face. Same eyes. Himself. The boy slowly raised his head and smiled. Not like a child. Like someone who had been waiting for a very long time. Then he spoke in Ethan's exact voice. "I told you, I remember this place." Ethan couldn't move. The chamber seemed to shrink around him, the air growing heavier with every breath as he stared at the boy sitting in the darkness. It was him, exactly him, but wrong in a way that made reality feel unstable. The child version didn't blink, didn't flinch, just watched Ethan like he was something familiar returning after a long absence. The spinning camera in the center of the room clicked softly, as if recording again even though no one touched it. Ethan raised the flashlight slightly, and the beam revealed more details on the boy's face. Small scars, tired eyes, an expression too old for his age. The boy slowly tilted his head and spoke again, voice calm and disturbingly certain. "You always come down here eventually." Ethan stepped back, shaking his head, trying to deny what he was seeing. "You're not me," he whispered. The boy smiled faintly. "Not yet." Behind him, the shelves of tapes began to vibrate softly, as if reacting to his presence. One by one, the labels on them changed. Ethan watched in horror as blank tapes rewrote themselves in real time, each one now reading different years of his life that hadn't happened yet. 2028, 2032, 2040. And then one label that made his stomach drop completely. Death recording, Ethan, final loop. The boy stood up slowly, stepping into the faint light, and Ethan saw something worse than the resemblance. There were marks on his wrists, thin lines like repeated restraints. The boy lifted his hands and showed them as if proving a point. "They always try to stop me," he said softly, "but I always find my way back." Ethan felt a wave of dizziness as memories that weren't his began flickering at the edges of his mind. Running through the same hallway, standing in the same chamber, watching himself over and over again. The boy walked closer, and Ethan noticed something horrifying. The chamber reacted to him. The walls shifted slightly, like breathing. The tapes hissed and clicked louder. The camera in the center turned slowly toward Ethan by itself. The boy stopped inches away and whispered, almost gently, "You think you found this place, but you were built to return to it." Ethan stepped back, hitting the stone wall. "What are you?" he asked, voice breaking. The boy's smile faded. For the first time, he looked serious. "I'm the version of you that stayed long enough to remember everything." The boy knelt down and picked up a tape from the floor that hadn't been there before. It was labeled in fresh ink, Origin, First Loop, Ethan. He held it out, offering it like a truth Ethan didn't want to accept. "This is where you started," the boy said. "Not born, not created, returned." Ethan stared at the tape, his hands shaking violently. "That's impossible," he whispered. The boy tilted his head again, softer now. "You said that every time." The camera in the center of the chamber suddenly whirred louder, and the screen beside it flickered on by itself. Ethan saw himself again, but this time older than before, sitting in the chair inside the chamber, calmly inserting tapes into the machine. That version of him looked directly into the camera and said, almost peacefully, "If you're watching this, it means I failed again." The image cut to static. The boy stepped closer one final time and placed the tape into Ethan's hand. "You can end the loop," he whispered, "but only if you stay." The chamber lights dimmed further, and for the first time, Ethan understood the real horror. Not the tapes, not the boy, but the fact that the chamber was waiting for him to decide which version of himself would continue. Ethan held the tape labeled Origin, First Loop, Ethan, like it might burn through his skin. The chamber had gone unnaturally still again, as if it was waiting for him to decide what reality would become next. The boy stood a few steps away, watching without blinking, no longer smiling. The spinning camera in the center of the room continued to track Ethan. Its mechanical were now steady and deliberate, like a machine remembering how to breathe. Ethan looked down at the tape, then at the chair in front of the camera. Every instinct screamed at him to destroy everything, to run, to never look back. But the chamber didn't feel like a place you could escape. It felt like something you were already inside of, something that had been happening long before you realized it. Slowly, Ethan walked toward the chair. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the room was adding weight to his body with every movement. Behind him, the boy whispered softly, "It always starts the same way." Ethan stopped for a moment, gripping the tape tighter. "Starts?" he repeated, his voice barely audible. The boy nodded toward the camera. "You sit. You watch. You remember." Ethan swallowed hard, then sat down in the chair. The moment he did, the camera's red light flickered on, and the tape in his hand slid into the machine by itself, without him touching it. The screen in front of him flickered to life instantly, showing a grainy black and white image of the same chamber. But it wasn't empty. Ethan saw himself sitting in the chair, calm, almost expressionless, as if he had done this countless times before. That version of him looked directly into the camera and spoke in a voice that was calm but exhausted. "If you're seeing this, then you chose to sit again." Ethan's breath caught. The recording continued. "There is no first time. There is only remembering." The image shifted, showing flashes of different versions of the chamber. Some destroyed, some flooded, some filled with endless rows of Ethan sitting in chairs facing cameras. Each version slightly different. Each version repeating the same moment. Ethan stood up abruptly, knocking the chair back. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "This isn't real." The boy stepped forward slightly and pointed at the screen. "That's you," he said quietly. "All of you." The camera zoomed in on Ethan's reflection in the screen, and for a split second, his reflection smiled back at him, even though he wasn't smiling. Then the screen cut to static, and a new message appeared in white text. Loop continued. Subject awake. The static on the screen didn't fade. It deepened, like the chamber itself was learning how to speak through noise. Ethan stood beside the chair, staring at the flickering image while his reflection lingered too long on the black glass of the monitor. The words loop continued. Subject awake stayed burned into the screen, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Behind him, the boy moved closer without making a sound. Ethan could feel him now, not as a presence behind him, but as something synchronized with him, like a second thought he couldn't silence. The chamber felt tighter, the air heavier, as if the walls were slowly closing in without moving. Ethan whispered, "What do you want from me?" The boy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed at the screen again. The image changed. Now it showed a hallway Ethan didn't recognize, but somehow he knew it. A long corridor lined with doors, each one marked with different years. 1996, 2003, 2015, 2026, and beyond. The camera in the footage moved through it like someone was walking forward while holding it, breathing heavily. Then Ethan saw something worse. Each door had his name carved into it. Different ages, different versions. Some doors were cracked open. Some were sealed with chains. Some were burned. The boy finally spoke, his voice quieter now. "Those aren't rooms." Ethan swallowed. "Then what are they?" The boy looked at him directly. "Memories you haven't lived yet." The static on the screen didn't fade. It deepened, like the chamber itself was learning how to speak through noise. Ethan stood beside the chair, staring at the flickering image while his reflection lingered too long on the black glass of the monitor. The words loop continued. Subject awake stayed burned into the screen, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Behind him, the boy moved closer without making a sound. Ethan could feel him now, not as a presence behind him, but as something synchronized with him, like a second thought he couldn't silence. The chamber felt tighter, the air heavier, as if the walls were slowly closing in without moving. Ethan whispered, "What do you want from me?" The boy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed at the screen again. The image changed. Now it showed a hallway Ethan didn't recognize, but somehow he knew it. A long corridor lined with doors, each one marked with different years. 1996, 2003, 2015, 2026, and beyond. The camera in the footage moved through it like someone was walking forward while holding it, breathing heavily. Then Ethan saw something worse. Each door had his name carved into it. Different ages, different versions. Some doors were cracked open. Some were sealed with chains. Some were burned. The boy finally spoke, his voice quieter now. "Those aren't rooms." Ethan swallowed. "Then what are they?" The boy looked at him directly. "Memories you haven't lived yet." Ethan stepped closer to the screen, unable to stop himself. The hallway on display shifted as if reacting to his attention, the camera moving forward toward one of the doors labeled 2026. The exact year. His current year. The door slowly opened in the footage, revealing a version of the chamber, but this one was different. It was brighter, cleaner, and in the center stood Ethan again, older, wearing the same exhausted expression from before. That version of him turned toward the camera and said, "If you've reached this door, it means you still haven't understood." Ethan stepped back, shaking his head. "I don't understand any of this." The boy finally moved beside him, speaking almost gently. "You think the chamber shows the past. It doesn't." The screen flickered violently. "It shows what's already happened to you." Ethan felt a sudden pressure in his head, like something unlocking behind his eyes. Images flooded in, him walking through that hallway, opening those doors, seeing versions of himself trapped inside each one. Not watching it for the first time, but remembering it. The chamber wasn't showing him something new. It was restoring something that had been removed. Ethan staggered back from the screen as the flood of memories hit him harder. No longer just flashes, but full scenes unfolding behind his eyes like they had always been there, buried under something he was never meant to question. The chamber seemed to react instantly, the lights dimming and brightening in a slow rhythm, as if it was breathing with him now. The boy watched silently, not moving, as Ethan dropped to one knee, gripping his head. The hallway of doors was still there in his mind, no longer just an image, but a place he had walked through before. Door after door, year after year, every version of himself locked behind time. Ethan whispered, almost breaking, "What did they do to me?" The boy finally stepped closer and answered, "They didn't do anything. They just started before you noticed." The screen beside the camera flickered again, this time showing something new. A recording of Walter. Not young, not old, but terrified. Walter stood inside the same chamber, holding the camera with shaking hands, speaking urgently into it. "If you're seeing this, then the loop has already chosen him again. The boy is not the origin. He is the result." Ethan's breathing slowed. Walter's voice continued, shaking harder now. "We tried to erase the source, but it didn't stop. It just learned to rebuild itself using him." The footage suddenly cut to a single frame, a document burning. On it, Ethan's name was being crossed out over and over again until nothing remained but one word underneath all versions of his identity. Subject. Ethan looked at the boy again, but now something had changed. The boy no longer felt like a separate presence. He felt closer, familiar in a way that hurt to acknowledge. The boy spoke softly, almost like he was remembering out loud. "They thought erasing your name would stop it." He stepped closer. "But you don't belong to a name." Ethan shook his head. "Stop saying that." The boy pointed at the camera in the center of the room. "Then ask it." The spinning camera clicked louder, focusing on Ethan again. The screen lit up one final time, showing a single archived file being opened, older than all the others. No date, no label, just a symbol. The moment it played, Ethan heard something impossible. A recording of his own heartbeat, slowed and reversed. Then a voice, not Walter's, not the boy's, spoke from the speakers in the chamber. Calm, empty, familiar. "You are not the first Ethan." The boy finished the sentence softly. "You are the version that stayed long enough to hear it." The chamber lights flickered violently, and for a split second Ethan saw it clearly. This place had no beginning, only repetition. The chamber no longer felt like a place. It felt like a decision that had been made long before Ethan ever understood the question. The spinning camera slowed, as if it was waiting for him again, not to record but to confirm. The boy stood only a few feet away now, completely still, watching Ethan with an expression that was no longer curiosity or warning, but recognition. Like this moment had already happened too many times to count. Ethan looked around the chamber, but everything felt unstable now. The tapes on the shelves no longer sat still. They shifted slightly, labels flickering between years that didn't align. His name appeared and disappeared across them like a glitch in reality itself. Somewhere deep inside the walls, the whispering returned, but now it wasn't random voices. It was one voice repeating across different tones, different ages. All of them him. Ethan swallowed hard. "If I walk away from this, does it stop?" he asked. The boy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the center of the chamber and placed his hand on the camera. "No," he said finally. "Walking away is just another version of continuing." The camera clicked once. A new tape slid out of the machine automatically, fresh, blank, waiting. Ethan stared at it. On its label, words were forming in real time. Choose. Become observer or become loop. The chamber lights dimmed until only Ethan and the boy remained visible. And for the first time, Ethan realized the real horror. There was no escape point, only role selection. Ethan stepped back slowly, his mind breaking between panic and understanding. Every instinct told him to destroy everything, the camera, the tapes, the chamber itself, but something deeper told him it wouldn't matter. The boy watched him carefully, as if waiting for the exact version of Ethan who would finally stop resisting. Ethan's voice shook. "What happens if I become the observer?" The boy's expression softened slightly. "Then you watch yourself forget again," he said, "and come back anyway." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "And if I become the loop?" The chamber responded before the boy could answer. The walls pulsed once, and every tape on the shelves turned at the exact same angle, pointing toward him. The boy spoke quietly. "Then you stop asking questions." The spinning camera turned fully toward Ethan now. The red light on it flared brighter than before, illuminating his face like a spotlight in a courtroom where the verdict was already decided. Ethan looked at the tape in his hand, then at the chair, then at the boy, and finally at the camera. His voice came out barely audible. "And if I refuse both?" The boy smiled sadly. "That's the only choice no version of you has ever finished saying." The chamber began to vibrate, and the tape in Ethan's hand started playing by itself. The tape in Ethan's hand wasn't just playing, it was reacting. The sound coming from it wasn't normal audio anymore. It was layered, like multiple recordings stacked on top of each other, each one slightly out of sync. Ethan heard his own breathing, but older, younger, panicked, calm, all at once. The chamber vibrated harder now, and the spinning camera locked onto him so precisely it felt like it was inside his thoughts instead of just watching him. On the screen, the footage began to form again. Not from the past, not from the future, from him. Ethan saw himself sitting in the chair, exactly where he had been minutes ago, but this version wasn't confused. He looked aware, exhausted in a way that came from understanding something too large to carry. The version on the screen slowly turned his head and looked directly into the camera, and spoke. "I tried leaving," the recorded Ethan said. The boy beside the real Ethan didn't move, but his presence felt heavier, like he was listening to something he already knew by heart. The recording continued. "But the house isn't the place. The chamber isn't the place. It's the return point." Ethan stepped back, whispering, "No, I'm not." But the screen Ethan interrupted him, as if anticipating every word. "You're going to say you're not like me. I said that too." The chamber lights flickered violently, and for a split second Ethan saw it. Rows of himself sitting in identical chairs in identical chambers, speaking into identical cameras, all slightly out of sync like broken reflections of the same moment. The boy finally spoke again, quietly. "You're watching the version of you that stopped running." The screen flickered, and the recorded Ethan leaned forward closer to the camera. His face filled the frame. "I didn't choose this," he said. "I just stopped resisting it." Pause. Then something worse. "I became the one who remembers, so the next one doesn't have to think it's new." Ethan felt his stomach twist violently. The boy stepped closer to him now, close enough that Ethan could feel the cold coming off him. Not like a child, but like something that had existed in too many versions of the same moment. The chamber walls began to shift again. Not physically, but visually, like reality itself was being rewritten in real time. Names on the floor reformed. The tapes relabeled themselves. The camera in the center clicked forward one frame at a time like it was approaching a final decision. Ethan whispered, almost broken now, "So what am I then?" The boy looked at him for a long moment, then answered simply, "The one standing before the loop decides if it continues." The chamber fell silent. The tape stopped, and for the first time, nothing was recording. The chamber fell into an unnatural silence after the tape stopped. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels paused, like the world itself forgot what it was supposed to do next. Ethan stood motionless beside the Vegas player, staring at the blank screen that no longer showed static or images, only a dark reflection of himself staring back faintly, as if unsure who was watching who. The boy remained still across the room, no longer smiling, no longer warning, just waiting, like something that had already completed this moment too many times to feel emotion. The spinning camera in the center of the chamber had also stopped, its red light dimmed to a weak glow, angled slightly downward toward the empty chair as if it had already moved on from Ethan's story. Ethan slowly stepped forward, his breath uneven, as fragments of every memory. The tapes, the boy, the endless versions of himself, began collapsing into a single unbearable understanding. Nothing here had ever been about discovery, only continuation. The chamber didn't trap him. It prepared him. Every Ethan before him had reached this exact silence, this exact moment of choice, and every time the outcome had already been recorded somewhere deeper than the room itself. The boy finally spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper now, almost human but drained of individuality, as if it had been repeated too many times across too many loops. "It doesn't end here. It only changes who remembers it next." Ethan looked at him, realizing the truth was not about escape or survival. It was about replacement, about becoming the version that carries the memory forward so the system never breaks. The camera flickered once, weakly, as if waking up again without permission, and the chamber began to feel familiar in a way that made Ethan's stomach drop, because familiarity meant repetition, and repetition meant he had already been here before, more times than he could ever remember.